fantastic. And now we have our final panel discussion of the day for you, and arguably one of the hottest topics, probably the hottest topic in AI at least right now. And it's been the focus of many hot debates and lots of our own sessions here today at the summit. And the name of this one is Examining the Opportunities Created by and the Limitations of, you guessed it, generative AI. Your moderator, who's moderated before for us today and is here again to do a fantastic job, I'm sure, is Philip Dawson, who is head of Global AI Policy and Advisory at Armilla AI and AI Policy Lead at the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society. So please welcome Philip and the panelists to the stage.
Good afternoon. So I'm aware that this is a pretty exciting panel, and we have a pretty full room. We're also the last, I believe, panelist standing between you and whatever after-conference activities you're choosing to pursue in Montreal. I hope you're having a great day. This is an exciting topic. I think it's become in the AI community one of the only thing that is being discussed and in the news as well. So I'm really excited to be here with a fantastic panel with some of the key players in the AI industry and who are true experts on this topic. So with that, I think why don't we just dive right in? And the first question I have relates to what each of you are most excited about with all the conversation about generative AI. When I look at the landscape of applications as it's evolving, as a former lawyer, I think if this technology was around 10 years ago, I might still be practicing. You have AI-powered contract generation. You have all kinds of tools to facilitate legal practice. You have, in different fields, fantastic potential to transform things like drug discovery and improve health outcomes for people. So those are some of the things that excite me, but I'd really love to hear from you guys. Cassie, Saul, Raj, what excites you the most about generative AI and its potential?
Well, for me, I'm really excited about the productivity upgrade that all of us are going to have. I mean, no matter what I'm working on in my day job, quietly, I'm gorging myself on all kinds of productivity opportunities from all this new stuff. Like, not only what's available through Google, but just this incredible ecosystem of things that make me individually more capable of achieving in less time what would have taken me months, years, stuff that would have blown my mind in grad school. So that's like a personal view. Now expand that. I was trying to find a nice estimate of how many software developers there are in the world. And I'm not seeing any estimate that's going above 30 million, right? 30 million people, at most, depending how you count it. Now imagine if that number suddenly, in a matter of years, went to 4 billion. What kind of world that would be? The individual productivity of doing what you're already doing, but also being able to automate some of that stuff, being able to write the equivalent of code and get things done. That is an incredible world-changing moment. So what's there not to be excited about? I mean, I'm sorry to...
No, it's good. I'm happy you have a positive view. I'm hopeful, but very suspicious. I have PTSD from the Watson days, if anyone was around many, many years ago. When Watson beat Ken Jennings in 2011, IBM made a fundamental decision that we are going to create the first enterprise-grade AI platform, and we are going to release it to enterprises. And I was very lucky. Well, some said congratulations, some said condolences. But I had the fortunate opportunity of deploying Watson at clients who are early innovators. And if I fast forward from 2011, 12, 13 to now, actually not much has changed. Still requires a corpus, still requires deciding the data sets, still requires a dedicated staff to train so that there's an accuracy level above a certain threshold. It still requires people within organizations who have institutional knowledge with nothing documented, still being hesitant about training the models, and those are the valued workers. And if I compare all the challenges we went through with Watson, fast forward, we're still actually dealing with those challenges right now. So I'm hopeful that there's more of an appetite. I don't think the risk and compliance departments have quite caught on yet and understand that if they leverage, for example, OpenAI's API, that means giving our data within their environment. I don't think enterprises have caught on to that just yet. So I am hopeful about its application and efficacy and it being an amplifier for knowledge workers, but I'm still very suspicious as to the gravity and the adoption within enterprises.
Thanks, Saul. So you see, this is a panel
Sorry, I'm
about,
not doing a Debbie Downer.
this is a panel about the opportunities and challenges. So here we go. We can't really we can't talk about the opportunities without also confronting the reality of some of the significant challenges that businesses face. Thank you. Raj.
So let me focus on the opportunities first.
All right.
What I really like about these new tools is they give people the upper hand. For a long time, if we wanted to work with Alexa or Siri, like we have to have these back and forth conversations because it never really understands us. And we spend our time, right, having to become a software developer, having to turn ourselves to be able to communicate with the computer. And what I really like about these latest generation of technologies now with this generative is its ability to really understand the nuance of natural language and a little bit of we can talk about it, the reasoning it can do in there. And so it feels much more natural. And so this is where I think it's also why it's become so widely popular is because now people feel a lot more in control of the conversation that they can have with this.
So one of the things that Cassie mentioned I really like is the opportunity to augment individual productivity. I've heard some people describe this as it's like I've hired a team, and it's like I've hired a couple employees in marketing. I have some design templates that are generated instantaneously. It's like I've hired an intern to help with some drafting. So I think I think there are some very exciting opportunities, even in day-to-day work, quite apart from at the industry level, notwithstanding the challenges, Saul, that you rightly point out. In terms of the popularity of the topic, and that came up, the public release of ChatGPT has obviously changed the public conversation about generative AI in general. But you often hear people in industry, particularly in research fields, also talk about how the underlying technology, large language models, and these capabilities have been around for a number of years, right? So my question to you is, with the shift in public conversation over the last 4 months, have you seen things change within your organization or in the industry at large? Is the conversation different, or this is really a public awakening to the current reality?
So I think one major difference was OpenAI's channel strategy. If you take a look at every company that has large language modeling, natural language processing, which has been around for decades, their primary channel strategy was B2B. It was enterprise to enterprise. OpenAI took a very unique channel strategy and they went direct to consumer. And they made it free. And the intention was to democratize capabilities like generative AI to the public so that corporations weren't leveraging it for profit solely. Now, of course, they decided to become for-profit after nonprofit. That's a different story. And I think that just democratized everything. And so within enterprises and large corporations, because now society is talking about it, teenagers are talking about it, college students are talking about it, more and more, if you're talking to old veterans of corporations, they're exposed to it because their kids are using it, which is ironic in nature, because if you're in the innovation team and you have to hear from your adolescent child that they're using ChatGPT and then you're asking about ChatGPT and what's the best way of deploying it, it raises some doubts. But I think that the chasm has occurred because of, one, the channel strategy, they went direct to consumer. I think, two, a lot of children of all ages are actually leveraging it, using it within the household to become more effective. It has become an amplifier for a lot of knowledge workers. And so I think organizations are forced to take a look at it. But I think there is right now a lot of hype within companies of how to best leverage it. Same way Metaverse kicked about a year and a half ago, and everyone went into Decentraland and they didn't know how to monetize on it. I think there's a real opportunity to monetize, but it also means that the risk and compliance teams and the knowledge workers who have institutional knowledge where things aren't documented fundamentally have to change the way they think in order for this to have any gravity and scale within corporations.
Cassie, Raj, feel free to jump in.
I can jump in as well. So what I've found really interesting in all my years in AI is how the way that we use words tends to lead us into funny group behaviors. At conferences like this, we will have two people having a conversation about AI, and you might watch them and realize they're talking about totally different things and talking just across one another. And so I think of this AI, the AI conversations, the way we're using those words, as nesting dolls. So 2 decades ago, if you wanted to go where the hype center was for AI, you go to a conference. What is that conference? That will be a research conference that is about the theory. And so your classic researchers who are developing the algorithms to learn from data. And then, a decade ago, people who are now at the new hype center, the old one still stays like a nesting doll, that core must be there, but now there's another doll around it. And that is all the engineers, builders who are really, really excited about taking things that were theoretical and now they're possible, but it's only going to make business sense to do it if we're talking about B2B stuff, if we're talking about enterprise stuff, if we're doing it at scale. Like, you can't just go do it yourself. The kind of data, the kind of compute, it's not going to be for the individual. So even I noticed this about my own design of keynotes. My conversations were implicitly for the engineering crowd who's likely going to go join some kind of company that wants to use AI. And that's where that conversation was. And I found myself realizing, oh no, I have to go rework a whole lot of my own messaging, because now a lot of the new hype is a third nesting doll that's leaning in, wants to know more about this stuff, but who are they? They are the users. This new move is a user experience move less than an AI move. But like, what is AI, right? Like, every time you get a new nesting doll, that's the new definition of AI. I'm not going to fight the language anymore. I'm done. So instead of saying the real AI is research, the conversation was first the researchy conversation, then the application, particularly at scale and to business. Now it is the individual UX. How can you take these things that are available at scale and build off of them to make companies, smaller firms, smaller apps that are for smaller audiences, and then eventually the single-use apps, which blows my mind, right? Like, you could make to your own tastes and caprices a video game world that is just for you, with your own stuff, instead of having to put up with a video game world that's, you know, not really for you because it has to contend with everybody's tastes and preferences. Such a different move, but I do feel like this latest thing is fundamentally UX. It's a design era. So good luck to those of us who are in our DNA, the research folk, and in our DNA, the engineers folk. I feel like now suddenly my UX colleagues are way outclassing me and having something to say in this conversation. So maybe kick me off the panel and replace me with a head of design from somewhere.
Well, maybe that's a good segue, Raj, because I think in your role and at Hugging Face in particular, you know, you're kind of at the center of a lot of, as an organization, at the center of this conversation, and some of the models that you host, some of the tools that you provide. I'd love to hear what you think has changed, if anything, since the release of ChatGPT, and your perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen an enormous amount of attention shift over to this. And I was just going to go back to that earlier point of there's a huge chasm, I believe, between kind of what we use ChatGPT for personal use as students versus when we talk about enterprises and what their use cases are, because they have different uses, they have different risk tolerance as well when it comes to these. And I think that's where we see the energy. I hear the executives saying, hey, we need our own ChatGPT inside, like, hey, data science team, what are you working on, like that? And I hear this story all the time when I talk to enterprises. And all it's done so far is really reinvigorate classic search approaches. Like, I need to do classic information retrieval to be able to get good quality facts because we know we can't just trust a large language model to come up with material. And so that's one of the trends that I've seen is that people are still struggling with exactly how we're going to use this approach within the enterprise, especially taking into account all the risks that are associated with it.
So interesting. I think there was a few years ago, 2016, 2017, one of the first AI hype cycles in industry. Yeah, every single business out there was canvassing the market, consultants, to see what type of AI solutions they could use, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's, well, maybe we're using AI already, but maybe we need a large language model to do this, right? We have a chatbot, it works pretty well, but maybe would it work even better with a large language model? Next question I have relates to some of these challenges, and I think one of the key challenges, and it's a very big topic that comes up associated with deploying LLMs safely in enterprises, is the issue of alignment and the challenges of taking a foundation general purpose model and tuning it very specifically with the sufficient guardrails to a particular function and doing that safely. So I'd love to ask the panel, Cassie, maybe I'll start with you. Could you just, what is alignment? What does alignment mean? I read about this in different news articles all the time now. AI alignment. This is a big challenge. Talk to us about AI alignment.
Sure. In a nutshell, that moment.
We have 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, 20 days. So when you hire that new employee who's totally qualified and super eager, and yet for some reason they don't give you what you hoped they would do for you, that is the alignment problem. So we think about capabilities versus alignment. You build a model that is capable, in theory, of doing something. It could do the work that you want, and you have some work that you want it to do. But now there's that bit of, can you express yourself in a way so that not only does it do that work, it doesn't then go and do some surprising other thing that makes you wish that you had never asked for that work in the first place. Put very simply, it is the genie problem, right? Humanity has had these be careful what you wish for fables throughout its existence. This is the same thing at a very practical level. How do you actually phrase what you want? As an individual user, then that's questions around prompt engineering. But how do you phrase what you want also when you're going to take something, you don't really understand how it's trained exactly, and now you're going to combine that with some of your own training data and approaches, and you hope it's going to start doing for you what you want? How do you approach doing that carefully and safely? And the recovering statistician in me that has never fully recovered is like, whatever you do, test it, test it, test it. However aligned you think it is, test it some more.
Yeah, I think working in corporate America, you ever have those meetings one-on-one to get alignment before the group meeting so you have collective alignment and no one's surprised? So you end up having 8 one-on-ones before the one big meeting that's about to come in 2 weeks. That's what alignment is. It's getting everyone to talk about the same language and agree on what the ultimate outcome and objective is. And I was a researcher / academia, then I went into management consulting, and I pivoted to industry. Now I always say I eat my own dog food, I don't sell my own dog food. And one of the hardest things is really to get alignment, because the first question I often ask, I'm like, how do you guys define AI? Automated intelligence, augmented intelligence, or artificial intelligence? Because within most corporations, there is no use case for artificial. Most are just barely trying to digitize some like business processes that fundamentally are still run by individuals who've been there 20 plus years. So there's massive opportunity for automated intelligence. I think with ChatGPT, there's an opportunity for augmented intelligence, but we've still got to get risk and compliance and those institutional knowledge workers over the chasm. Artificial, not quite. So alignment is massive. No one can quite define what AI is. But a strategy that I've taken that's effectively worked is before we do anything about innovation or AI, if there's an interest, great, but there's a day-and-a-half boot camp with all the executives. And the first thing we do is ground ourselves, or I ground them on the terminologies. How are we defining AI? And where's the lowest hanging fruit? Because we all want to do something super shiny, but the shiny things oftentimes don't get the attention span of 16 months, which is on average what it takes to deploy and operationalize an AI model within a large organization. Unfortunately so. It requires a ton of focus and funding and tenacity and resilience, because there's a lot of, I don't want to say naysayers, but non-believers, but more importantly, your stakeholders have diverted their attention to something else. There just isn't the attention span. And so I think automated intelligence, if we want to call that true AI, is probably the biggest opportunity, and where almost everyone can gain alignment at an enterprise level without much friction. Then the question becomes which business processes, because when you start unpacking it, you realize, holy crap, how does a $50 billion corporation run on Excel spreadsheets still, with humans copying and pasting cells in 2023?
So I'm feeling capricious. I want to say a very curmudgeonly thing. I'm just like, I have to say this super curmudgeonly thing. What if we just stopped using words we haven't defined? And then did, like, at the top of our documents, you know how you do in mathematics, let x equals, and then we're in agreement what we mean x to equal for the rest of the document? Like, we do that in math, right? We're not like, oh no, you used an x that's not my x, I'm gonna get mad at you. How dare you be using x to mean your thing? Please, folks, if you have a sense in your organization that you're using the words AI, you have no idea what you think you're saying, just stop. Right? Right at the top of the page, let AI be rabbits, and then for the rest of the document, wherever you use the word AI, it's rabbits, and at least the rest of it makes sense, right?
But there's like vernacular FOMO.
know,
Every
it's
executive
such
has
FOMO.
to use the word AI. Or do you guys remember in the early 2000s, it was MDM, then it was big data, then it was IoT, then it was cyber. There's like every 2-3 years, there's a new term that comes along, and everyone has to use it in a very peanut butter spread way. And your job, unfortunately, is to sift through the noise.
But all that jargon is like the in-crowd indicators too. There's a reason, right? We use all the jargon and stuff in that. But when it comes back to this like issue of alignment and thinking about the feedback and aligning it with the company, this is also where we come back to some of the fundamentals of machine learning that, well, if you want to do that alignment, somebody has to collect the data, figure out exactly what it is, right? That fundamental piece. Then we have to think about training the model and being able to have access to that model so we can kind of properly align it. So there's a lot of mechanisms that we have to put into play that take quite a bit of time to get that alignment.
So tomorrow, I think I'm doing the closing keynote, but I'm calling it AI for executives. You guys can call it whatever you want. But fundamentally, the 6 areas, or I call them the 6 whoopsies that people overlook when it comes to actually operationalizing AI, regardless of what your definition is. Data's there, the infrastructure and framework's there, the talent's there, security and compliance is there, and there's a series of whoopsies that I think companies ignore. And that's after you cross over the hurdle of getting unanimous decision-making on the use case. And that's after you convince them that this is the funding I'm going to need to do it right. Then they cut that by 70%, which increases the timeline, and then you're like, well, crap, I'm not gonna have their attention span for 14 months. And then you start unpacking, and then you essentially negotiate what this is going to take and when the desired output is due. And you hope that they're still either with the company or they're still paying attention or a new vernacular hasn't come into their speech and they still care about the original use case.
So Cassie thinks we should throw out the word AI, maybe throw out the word alignment. I think Saul, what I'm hearing is that this is kind of just a reality of the
Corporate
trends in the
America.
industry.
Yep.
And Raj, it sounds like they actually think the jargon could be useful in giving people, at least for a moment, some hooks into topics that they're just beginning to explore. And I'd like to come back to you because I think some of the work that you guys do at Hugging Face is really exciting. What types of tools are you seeing that could be useful to end users of generative AI to help support alignment?
I think one of the biggest things is just having the transparency to help understand what's going on with these models through the entire life cycle. So understanding, when we get these boxes, when that ChatGPT gives us something, well, that data that was trained on ChatGPT came from somewhere, right? You saw Reddit just yesterday announced that we're not give our info anymore. Giving access to, how is the model trained? What does it look like? What type of infrastructure does? The access to the open source that way, as well as thinking about the explainability of the model. What are the outputs? Are they biased? And having a conversation about that entire part and the transparency to help enrich in all this, right? Like, not every student is going to understand each of those parts, but to start bringing it into the dialogues, into the vernacular, so we all understand the limitations of this technology, just like we all understand the limitations of the internet now, versus 25 years ago, it was a scary thing like that.
Thanks so much. Like, my companies in the last 6 to 8 months have started developing alignment tools. We see a big demand in industry for companies or large enterprises that are interested in adopting the technology. They have a need for some of this tooling that can help customize and test for a wide variety of potential inputs that are typical with these models. Do you see a market for this evolving? Is this something that you think is going to come from the open source community? Do you Raj, anybody else on the panel? It seems like a massive gap that we've identified. I'm just curious to see where you see some of the solutions coming from.
Well, I think, as with a lot of machine learning, we want to find the least kind of compute-intensive way of getting a model to do what we want. And so I think there's a big hope that we can start with these base fundamental models and then tune just a little bit to our particular task. And I think there's a lot of energy going, a lot of different tools and frameworks that are going into that. And the key is if we can do that successfully, right, that reduces the amount of compute to be able to solve a particular task. So I can see a lot of emphasis in the alignment piece, and this is where Hugging Face is also building out a lot of tools like the Heft package, for example, to help people kind of efficiently do that.
So look, we have about 10 minutes left. We talked about the opportunity, what's exciting, some of the hype and some of the misnomers that are flying around because of generative AI. Let's talk a little bit more seriously about the risks. I think that's hard to avoid. People in the audience, whether you're in industry or not, you've been reading the news, you're aware of a public letter to put a moratorium on AI research and development, in some ways because of the release of ChatGPT and concern about how fast things are evolving. Regulators in multiple countries are now investigating ChatGPT as well. There's been some letters, and including one that just went out this morning in Canada with some leaders from the AI ecosystem here, asking the government to think seriously about regulation. We have regulatory initiatives in the EU, and generative AI, general purpose AI, as it's described there, has been one of the focuses of EU lawmakers for the last 6 months because they just don't know what to do with it. Who should bear the burden and so on. So, with all of this, I want to ask each of you for your perspectives about how credible the risk is, and what are the types of risks that, if any, that cause you some concern?
Yeah, I think there's many layers in the cake at a macro level. Let's say the Americas takes the stance and the initiative of we're going to progress and evolve exponentially our AI ethics, code of conducts, and protocols. The problem is we've got many countries in this world that don't operate by the same code of conducts. You've got China as a threat. You've got Russia as a threat. We may slow down in order to properly and securely put in place protocols. It doesn't necessarily mean that on a global and a macro level, others are slowing down, which by default puts us in a disadvantage. So how do two cars race in a game that's just not winnable? That's at a macro level. I think at a micro level, what's happening is, even within companies right now, if you're leveraging the cheap/free version, if you have your own playground, great, or if you're paying the $20 a month, great. What's happening is data privacy is a huge concern within enterprises. You've got companies like Samsung and unfortunately others where employees have fed it financial information that's not publicly available in the 10Ks and 10Qs, or even proprietary formulations and ingredients. And they're asking ChatGPT questions by feeding it corporate data that is considered IP, because individuals have not been trained, or even if you're taking all those mandatory videos on what to do and what not to do around data security and privacy, it's still not clicking. So we are fundamentally giving proprietary data within an open environment hoping to amplify or enhance ours. So now you've got security concerns at the corporate level. But I think fundamentally at an individual level, intellectual atrophy will eventually set in. Because no longer do you have to think about a copyright or original content or how to build a strategy deck or what's a good omni-channel strategy. I don't have to pay the big four consulting firms $250,000 to create a PowerPoint deck of 40 slides when at the end of the day I know the 8 key pillars and I can do a leverage between ChatGPT and Google to get my answers anyway. So I think there's a fundamental risk, but I think human intelligence is at risk because we can tend to be lazy a little bit if we get the answers.
I have to push back.
So
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Let me just finish the 3-layer cake. So I think at the top layer, there's a macro issue. What do we do with the other countries who aren't going to run by our ethics? At the middle layer, we are fundamentally giving away data that is IP related, and that's going to be an issue. And I think at an individual level, you've got many types of folks, right? Those who fundamentally would get motivated by this and use it as a creative outlet and other avenues. And then I think there's those that will take shortcuts and just leverage it, and intellectual atrophy will eventually kick in with a certain population.
So I completely, the first 2 layers, I'm so glad that you covered that. I have to push back against the one about the individuals. I'm not sure that we are dumber as individuals for not making our own papyrus. And I'm not sure that having the internet, which has brought with it all kinds of less walking to the library to look up in encyclopedia, I mean, that skill, oh no, index table of contents in a book, I'm just so bad at that now. I don't think that that has made us worse. I think every time we are given more components, we find more and more creative and cool things to do with them. And with these tools, it's going to become extremely individual. We compromise so much with things we have to use because they're made not for us, they're made for some nebulous many. As things become more customized to us and we can play with them and do more, push the boundary on creativity, I think we're going to have a flourishing in art, in science, in engineering. I mean, look already at some of the cool stuff that people are doing with LLMs that are made available to individuals, and individuals start, breaking Twitter with the kinds of things they come up with.
Yeah.
I think it's going to
there's
make us
truth
more,
in
not
that.
less.
I would just look at the general population. Not everyone works at the fangs of the world. Not everyone's an engineer, not everyone's a developer. Most of the population actually is not in a technical field, oddly enough. So you've got the middle population to consider where, here's a question. How many of you guys want directions? You naturally open up your Google apps or maps versus memorizing the direction that you repetitively go. And you're like, where was I going again? Hold on, let me find out and enter it in. Versus just fundamentally imprinting it in your brain. Or how many times do we forget how to do 3-digit variable like multiplications where we did, but now because we have calculators and everything's available. So I agree with what you're saying, but we're exchanging knowledges, right? We're giving some and we're taking away. And I think for the middle population that isn't necessarily in our field and may not get juiced and excited by this, we could hit intellectual atrophy, which in some areas can slow us down.
So
it's a good research project, though.
Yeah, the research project is what will we do with the time we get back? And I suppose pessimists might say, with the time we get back, we will stare at a wall miserably and do absolutely nothing. With the time I get back, I'm going to do so much. And I feel like people will tend to spend as much intellectual effort regardless. You'll just do more with it. So,
Raj, please.
Yeah, I don't miss the multiplication. I don't miss multiplying.
Chatty Cathy's here.
This is great. Of course, I'm not supportive of the moratorium at all, but I also do understand the nervousness that people have. Because when you look at something like ChatGPT and you open up the manual that OpenAI has put out about how the model works, well, that manual is empty. There's no real description of how it's doing it. And there's legitimate concerns about these companies sucking up all the data without telling us what data is being used to train the models. How are these models being trained? How are the outputs going to it? And so I can understand why a reflexive thing is, well, we're a little bit nervous. Can we put a brakes on this? Because we haven't been able to be transparent and open and be able to bring people along with how these things are working. Because sometimes we want to put a marketing pitch on it, right? Like we're selling this out by API in a magic box, makes a lot more money than a box that we know simply how it works.
So moratorium maybe shot across the bow to say, look, things are moving very quickly, and it's very difficult for us to constantly have to be reactive to these new technologies that are released, and then we're trying to figure out exactly how we can contain the risks. But we're always playing catch up. So there's some merit to the caution, but a ban or a moratorium, I think I would agree, is not feasible to implement, and there's all kinds of beneficial uses of artificial intelligence that we'd be missing out on. So look, we have 1 minute left, and unfortunately, we're not going to have time for questions and answer. But I'd like to conclude with a lightning round. Okay, and that this morning, and it's so in if you can, in one sentence, might be hard for you, Cassie. In one sentence, complete the following sentence: the opportunities of generative AI outweigh their limitations because, or fill in the blank.
For me, the opportunities way outweigh it, but I think it's in proportion to how open our models are. A little bit of math formula.
I believe in its efficacy and amplifier, and I think it can unleash a lot of creativity. But I'm moving forward with a lot of caution.
I will complete the sentence with in the long run. Because in the short run, as optimistic and all that cute as I was, I do understand that change is difficult. And the thing that makes me most uncomfortable about all this, at both the corporate and the individual level, is the unequalness of how those effects are going to hit. Right now, I probably personally subscribe to more than $1,000 a year of productivity improving things, right? That is not something that everybody can afford. The economics of that are staggering, I think, and I really hope that regulators, individuals, the public thinks about what it means and thinks about how we increase access rather than take it away, and how we don't close things up so that a select few can have it, but give it to as many as possible, carefully, thoughtfully.
Well, look, that's all the time we had. Thanks very much. Cassie, that wasn't one sentence.
Sorry.
But, that was a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Thank you.